France, we're told, has had enough. That's the line doing the rounds in the more theatrical corners of social media and in the sort of private chats where people speak a little too confidently about what Paris thinks, as if a city can sit down, fold its arms, and deliver a verdict. Still, behind the exaggeration, there's a familiar and very political truth. Power rarely announces itself with a press statement. It simply stops returning your calls. The chatter this time is about Meghan Markle and a supposed frostiness from the French fashion world, the kind that doesn't show up as a formal ban or a public snub, but as a gradual tightening of access. No drama at the airport, no ministerial briefing, no sources close to the Elysee making a song and dance of it. Just, so the story goes, a sense that the old glide path into elite events has become bumpier. Less, of course, darling, and more, we'll get back to you. If you've spent any time around Westminster, you'll recognize the tactic. When the establishment wants you gone, it doesn't always throw you out, it just turns the heating down and hopes you take the hint. Now, before we go any further, it's worth stating the obvious, because the Sussex ecosystem is a hall of mirrors. Plenty of what circulates is rumour, inference, and wish fulfillment dressed up as insight. Some of it is genuinely sourced, some of it is fantasy, and a lot of it is that modern hybrid, a claim repeated so often it starts to feel like fact. But even when the details are hazy, the underlying theme can still be real, and the theme here is control. Who gets to enter certain rooms, under what terms, and at whose pleasure? In Paris, fashion isn't merely fashion. It's hierarchy, tradition, money, and national pride stitched together with the kind of discipline that makes British party managers look positively relaxed. Invitations aren't just invitations, they're signals, and signals matter. The most convincing part of the current gossip is not the breathless idea of a ban, but the quieter suggestion that a number of gatekeepers may have decided Meghan brings more complication than value. It's not hard to imagine why that perception might exist. In any tightly managed world, whether it's couture or cabinet, the worst sin is not ignorance, it's hijacking the moment. Some in the fashion orbit, according to the off-the-record murmurs, see Meghan as someone who treats the industry as a backdrop for a personal narrative, rather than a craft with its own rules and pecking order. That criticism may be fair or wildly unfair depending on your view of her, but the mechanics are familiar. The establishment types who run these worlds don't mind outsiders. They mind outsiders who act like insiders without doing the tedious bit first, the relationships, the deference, the slow accumulation of legitimacy. In Westminster, you can spot the same irritation when a newly elected MP behaves like a future Prime Minister before they've even learned where the toilets are. And then there's the resentment that comes when the headline becomes the person rather than the work. Designers want you to talk about the cut, the fabric, the idea. They do not want a week of coverage about whether a guest's presence is a statement. That's not because the industry is pure or noble, by the way. It's because it's competitive and vain, and like politics, obsessed with narrative control. A fashion house may love celebrity right up to the moment it stops being able to steer what the celebrity means. So the story being whispered is less Meghan is forbidden from France and more the tolerance has thinned. A few people in those circles are said to have started applying boundaries, fewer favours, less flexibility, less indulgence for last-minute appearances that suddenly become everyone else's problem. Some even claim, with the knowing tone people adopt when they're not required to prove anything, that organisers have been encouraged to keep things tidy. If you're picturing a shadowy cabal leaning on officials, calm down. The more boring explanation is usually the right one. A network of influential people deciding individually and collectively that the risk-reward calculation has changed. And risk is the key word here, not in a moral sense, but in the very practical way institutions think. The modern elite is not sentimental. It doesn't ask whether you deserve kindness, it asks whether you might cause a headache. The Sussex brand, fairly or unfairly, has become associated with unpredictability, sudden grievance, public fallouts, and a habit of turning private tension into content. That's not a uniquely Meghan trait, to be clear, it's a broader cultural trend. But when you're trying to run a tightly choreographed event, unpredictability is poison. This is where the tale expands beyond Paris, because the same gossip machine insists the chill isn't confined to one city. There are claims of doors closing in parts of the Middle East too, particularly in places that trade heavily on stability, controlled optics, and carefully curated partnerships. Dubai gets name-checked because Dubai always gets name-checked. It's the modern shorthand for gleaming power and transactional glamour, a place that will happily host the world's celebrities, provided they don't bring a mess. If the rumor mill is right, the concern in those circles is not about manners or protocol, but about volatility and association. In other words, we like fame, we don't like fallout. Again, treat this as chatter, not a court document, but it does align with a broader reality about how reputations travel. In these places, image is not merely public relations, it's governance by other means. The unspoken rule is that you can be controversial if you are controllable. If you are not controllable, you are not worth the bother. That might sound cold. It is cold. It's also politics in its purest form. The more lurid versions of the story drag in allegations about finances, scrutiny, and the kind of ominous clouds language that always appears when people want to imply wrongdoing without having to prove anything. You'll hear references to charity oversight, to paperwork, to regulators, to shadowy questions that may or may not exist outside internet threads. Some MPs insist off the record that something will come out eventually, which is the sort of sentence that tells you more about the speaker's appetite than their evidence. In Westminster, this is practically a hobby. We are a country that can turn a rumor into a select committee in about 15 minutes if it flatters our sense of intrigue. So let's keep our heads. There is a difference between people are whispering and this is true. But even without leaning on the darker insinuations, you can still see why certain institutions might choose distance. The Sussex story has become a live wire. Touch it and you might get shocked, even if you meant well. Brands, networks, governments, philanthropists, none of them enjoy being dragged into someone else's saga. If you doubt that, take a stroll through Parliament and ask staffers how many times they've begged a minister to stop making everything about themselves. Same principle, slightly better suits. Which brings us back home, because however global this drama feels, it plays differently when viewed from London. In Westminster lounges, the Sussex saga is treated with a peculiar mix of boredom and fascination. Boredom because MPs have actual crises to deal with: bills, budgets, war, migration, public services that creak like an old staircase. Fascination because it sits at the intersection of monarchy, media, identity politics, and celebrity culture, which means it's impossible to avoid. It's the political equivalent of a soap opera playing in the corner of the pub. You pretend you're not watching, but you can still recite the plot. There's also a constitutional layer people forget. The monarchy is not just a family, it is an institution with political implications, and the government has a permanent interest in its stability. Not because ministers are romantics, but because the crown is woven into the machinery of the state. Anything that shakes trust in that machinery matters. That's why, privately, some in Westminster have always been uneasy about the Sussexes' habit of fighting their battles in public. It normalizes a kind of institutional disorder, and institutions hate disorder the way cats hate baths. The current Whisper campaign claims Prince Harry has been more absent, more solo, more cautious about interviews and public engagements. That might be true, partly true, or simply the consequence of scheduling and strategy. But the interpretation doing the rounds is politically interesting, that he's trying, quietly, to separate his personal future from the shared brand. People in politics understand this instinct. When a ship lists, the first thing you do is check the lifeboats.
There's talk, too, of strict conditions for interviews, of topics declared off-limits, of a desire to keep marital questions out of the frame. That isn't a smoking gun. It's just what anyone would do if they were tired of being asked the same question in 15 different ways. But the symbolism matters, because the Sussex story has always been sold as a joint project, a united front against hostile forces. If that front looks less united, Westminster will notice, not out of affection necessarily, but because shifting alliances are the only sport we truly respect. Could there be a more human explanation? Of course. People get older, priorities change, children arrive, the appetite for constant exposure declines, and Harry, in particular, has always seemed torn between the allure of public storytelling and the toll it takes. But politics teaches you to watch behavior, not biography. A politician can say we're united all day long. If they start appearing separately and sounding careful, people read the rooms. Then there's the question of return. Every so often, someone floats the idea of Harry rehabilitating himself in Britain, finding a role, making peace. The talk is usually framed as though a few charming gestures could patch over years of public conflict. That's not how institutions work. In Westminster terms, it's like expecting a party leader to stroll back into the parliamentary party after torching half the backbenches on television. What would the incentive be? The palace, from what one hears, has little interest in relitigating the past, and government certainly doesn't want to be caught holding the bag for a royal reconciliation story that could collapse into another round of recriminations. The state is allergic to avoidable chaos. If there is any quiet sympathy for Harry in private, it does not automatically translate into a path back. Sympathy is cheap. Consequences are expensive. Meanwhile, the entertainment world, like politics, is famously timid in its own way. Executives, agents, producers, philanthropists, they all pretend to be bold, while quietly running risk assessments in their heads. There's a claim that projects have stalled and enthusiasm has cooled. That may simply be the normal life cycle of celebrity ventures, many of which die in meeting rooms and never see daylight. But it's plausible that the Sussex brand has become, at minimum, complicated. If you partner with someone and the partnership becomes a referendum on their personal grievances, you haven't bought a project, you've bought a feud. And here comes the uncomfortable bit for anyone who genuinely wants Meghan to thrive. Institutions do not argue with you. They don't issue rebuttals. They don't spar on television. They don't post a long thread explaining why they've moved on. They just go quiet. In Westminster, silence is the sound of a decision being made. If a whip stops calling, if a committee chair stops replying, if your colleagues stop wandering over for a chat, it doesn't mean they're busy, it means you've been filed away. The Sussex narrative for years has been shaped around exclusion, being shut out, being mistreated, being misunderstood. That story has emotional power, especially in a culture that loves a victim-hero arc. But there's a difference between rhetorical exclusion and operational exclusion. One is a story you tell. The other is when the diary stays empty, the invitations don't come, and the gatekeepers suddenly can't make it work. Which is worse? Criticism still gives you something to push against. Silence is just air leaving the room. The irony, and yes, we're allowed a little irony, is that the very thing that made the Sussexes compelling to the media has also made them exhausting to institutions. Drama sells. Drama also frightens. When every disagreement becomes a public spectacle, potential partners start to imagine themselves as the next episode. Nobody wants to be a supporting character in someone else's psychological thriller, especially when they thought they were signing up for a tasteful documentary and a charity gala. To be fair, Meghan has her defenders, and they are not all starry-eyed fans. Some people in politics and media see her as a convenient villain in a culture that still struggles with powerful women, outsiders and Americans who refuse to learn the British art of smiling through irritation. They'll tell you, sometimes convincingly, that the hostility towards her has always had an edge: class, race, tradition, sexism, the old British suspicion of ambition when it doesn't come wrapped in the right accent. They're not wrong to point to that. Westminster is not immune to prejudice. We run on it some days like a dodgy generator. But two things can be true at once. A person can face unfair hostility and still make avoidable mistakes. The establishment can behave badly and still respond predictably when attacked. And the Sussexes, as a project, have often chosen confrontation as a method. Confrontation can be morally satisfying. It can also be strategically disastrous. Institutions don't mind being criticized. They mind being made to look weak. If you force them into a corner, they will choose the option that protects themselves. They always do. So what are we really watching here? Not a soap opera, not a morality play, not a simple story of villains and victims. We're watching the politics of access. The rules are unspoken, the sanctions are informal, and the people who enforce them will never admit they're doing it. But the effect is real. Circles tighten. Rooms become harder to enter, and the glamour that once felt effortless starts to look like hard labor. And you can't help but ask, is this what power looks like in the 2020s? Not a public condemnation, but a quiet withdrawal. Not a scandal that explodes, but a series of small refusals that add up to a closed world. Or, more pointedly, what happens when your entire public identity is built around being talked about, and then the talking stops? There's a wry little lesson here for Westminster too. Our politics has become obsessed with narrative, branding and performance. MPs talk about owning the story, as if the country is an Instagram account. They chase attention, confuse exposure with authority, and then look startled when the public grows tired. Meghan and Harry didn't invent this culture. They're just living in its harshest spotlight. If the rumors are exaggerated, they'll fade. If the chill is real, it will deepen without anyone needing to say a word. Either way, the larger truth remains. Institutions are not sentimental, and they are rarely forgiving when they feel personally attacked. They don't clap back, they close ranks. They do it with a smile, a polite email, and a calendar that's suddenly full for the next 6 months. In the end, this isn't merely a story about a duchess, a prince, or Paris Fashion Week. It's about how modern power protects itself, how reputations become currency, and how quickly that currency can be devalued when the people who print it decide you're no longer worth the ink. And in a country like ours, where so much still depends on who will open the door and who will pretend not to hear the knock, it should make any listener pause and wonder what else in British politics is being decided, quietly out of sight,